Okay, now that you've finished the section on ownership, let's talk about some of the key concepts that are important for you to know. First of all, there's a word called freehold. Freehold means ownership. Freehold and ownership are synonymous. They're interchangeable. So if someone's talking about, well, I have a freehold or I own a freehold estate, you're talking about an estate and ownership. The estate and ownership we work mostly with in real estate is called fee simple absolute. But sometimes we shorten that term and just call it fee or fee ownership. That's F-E-E, fee ownership. It's an old English word, and it comes from English common law. Sometimes you'll also see it called fee simple, which is kind of halfway there. So you have fee, fee simple, and fee simple absolute. All three of those terms are used, and what they mean is the most comprehensive type of ownership that someone can have. This is ownership that will last for an indeterminate period of time. So, in other words, there's no strings attached that could sever that ownership. Now, don't misunderstand. People habitually go out and get loans against their properties in order to buy their homes or commercial buildings, whatever they might be desirous of buying. But that's a different concept. You can't get a loan on a piece of real estate, in most cases, practically speaking, unless you have fee simple absolute title. And of course, if you don't pay back that loan, then you could be facing foreclosure. We're not talking about that. We're talking about, when you're talking about this indeterminable amount of time, that there's no strings attached. That there's a type of ownership called defeasible fee or determinable fee, where someone could give you a property, let's say your great uncle, and he says, you're going to own this property as long as you do this or you don't do that. This is a type of weird science ownership, and it's not something we work with that often in real estate. Another example of this weird science ownership would be a life estate. And these types of estates, these types of ownership, they are ownership, but they're ownership with strings attached. And we don't work with them that often in real estate, but they're terms you need to know for the real estate exam. Well, because quite frankly, they're such juicy terms, any decent exam writer's got to use them to see if you understand them. So have a good feeling for fee simple determinable or determinable fee. Sometimes you interchange the order of the words used there. And just understand that it's not something we see a lot except for your test. What you will be dealing with quite a bit, practically speaking, are how people are vested in title. If they own it alone, they own it in severalty. They're severed from everybody else, no big deal. But if they own it with someone else, it's some sort of joint ownership. And there's different ways these joint ownerships can be structured. The default or most common would be tenants in common. Now, I say it's most common because if you don't try to do the other one right, which is called joint tenancy, this is what you end up with. You end up with tenants in common. Tenants in common only requires one unity, and that is the unity of possession. The other type of joint ownership is joint tenancy. And the difference between joint tenancy and tenants in common primarily is that joint tenancy has this right of survivorship. In other words, the last man or woman standing gets the property. If there were 3 owners under joint tenancy and the other co-owner started dying, as the first one died, all of a sudden your 1/3 share went to 1/2 share. And then the second one dies, and all of a sudden the surviving owner owns it in severalty. They own 100% of it. Joint tenancy, the main difference is that it has that right of survivorship. Tenants in common doesn't have a right of survivorship. If you own something jointly with 3 owners under tenants in common and one of the owners dies, his or her share goes to their survivors. It goes to their heirs, or whoever they want to give it to. They might want to give it to a nonprofit type group, but their share will be distributed according to their will or the state laws that are in effect that govern that transfer of property. Joint tenancy, however, it goes to the other owners. Tenants in common goes to their heirs. There's another type of joint ownership that's really, really close to joint tenancy, and that's called tenants by the entireties. Tenancy by the entireties or tenants by the entireties is only for married people, people that are legally and lawfully married, and it's a lot like joint tenancy in that it requires 4 unities. The 4 unities can be remembered with the acronym PITT, P-I-T-T, Possession, interest, time, and title. PIT. P-I-T-T. You have to have PIT for both joint tenancy and tenancy by the entireties. The difference in tenancy by entireties, one additional requirement, is that you have to be legally and lawfully married. Under joint tenancy, each individual owner, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4, doesn't matter, can give away, can transfer, can sell their percentage interest. But under tenancy by entireties, you can't sell your interest unless you have your spouse's approval. Very few people use tenancy by the entireties just primarily because they may not even know about it, but it is legal in Utah. So, you have joint tenancy, tenants in common, and tenancy by the entireties. Tenancy in common, one unity only, unity of possession. Joint tenancy and tenancy by the entireties, PIT, P-I-T-T, possession, interest, time, and title. Possession, everyone has an equal right of possession. That's the one you have to have for tenants in common as well. Interest, it must be equal interest. If you ever see a situation where someone owns more of a property than someone else, like one owner owns 75% and the other owner only owns 25%, it has to be tenants in common, because it can't be the other two, because you have to have equal interest shares.